Well, hello and welcome once again to the DCL podcast, where we're inviting you to sit back, relax, and we'll be on our way shortly. Well, welcome back to the DCL podcast, and once again, we are recording without Christy because she is still down at Walt Disney World. I think she's on vacation forever down there this summer, and next year, I think I'm going to trade places with her, let her do the recordings, and no, I'm just kidding, but it's been a lot of fun following her along, and to be completely honest, it's been a lot of fun talking to the different guests that we've been able to do recordings with over the last week or so, and I want to welcome back to the show tonight, Brett from Wisconsin. How are you doing today, Brett?
Great, Steve. Thanks for having me on again.
Oh, I really appreciate it. And, you know, where we kind of left off, we did the show kind of about the shows on the ship. And you had mentioned that you were going to be doing your first non-Disney cruise over the British Isles.
Yep. Just got back from a 2-week trip out in Europe, and it was a great experience and definitely a lot to share as to how the Royal Caribbean experience is different from Disney, but also has a lot of the same positive qualities too.
Well, perfect. Yeah, and I think this needs to almost be like a series this summer. We've got several people that, similar to yourself, who've mostly or exclusively cruised with Disney, are kind of branching out due to some different itineraries and for that they wanted to try, and maybe some different price points and whatnot. And it's almost like a series that we're running this summer between Norwegian, Royal Caribbean, and a couple other different cruise lines. So I appreciate you doing this. Well, before we jump into it, for those who may not have listened to some of your previous episodes, Brett, could you give us just a quick background on some of the cruises you've taken with Disney?
Sure. So from 2011 through 2018, I had gone on 7 Disney cruises. 5 of them were Caribbean. One was a Bahamian cruise, and then one was a transatlantic from Miami to Barcelona. So I've done anywhere from 5-night to 14, it was a 14-night cruise. Yeah. Or actually, I should say 13-night, but it felt like 2 full weeks. Yeah, so I've covered 3 of the 4 Disney ships, all of them except the Dream, and really got a feel for a lot of the activities and entertainment on board. I'm kind of the type where I want to experience as much as possible on the ship, so I certainly have had my fair share of wonderful experiences and opportunities through Disney Cruise Line over the years, and I still have that allegiance and passion for Disney Cruise Line.
And, you know, before we kind of jump into it, this is your 5th show, right, Brett, with us, I think?
Yeah, I think I've done 3 others with you guys.
Yeah, so 3, so this would be the 4th.
Yeah, it's been several now.
So we're coming up on 5, and Amber, who is on my case about when we get to 5, we need to give out a gold jacket or something like they used to do on Johnny Carson. I think we're going to have to come up with something. So we'll get back to you because I'm sure that we will somehow be talking again after this show. So I need to work on that for you guys that have been on so many times. I really do appreciate it. Well, this is your 2nd time in Europe. I know the first time was when you did the transatlantic, correct?
Correct, yeah.
Okay, and well, first of all, in this one, in past cruises, you've traveled with your family, and you've also traveled alone. Am I correct?
Not for cruises.
Just with your family?
Not for cruises, okay. Yeah.
So who did you travel with this time?
Yeah, it was once again with my mom and dad, so it was a nice family time together. I live on the other side of the country from them now, so cruises in my grad school years at least have been a nice way of reconnecting and sharing new memories together.
Perfect. So what made you guys decide to do this one? Obviously, you know, Europe is an exciting itinerary to go back to. And why don't you talk about which cruise you did and why you guys decided to pick this one?
Sure. Well, I'll let you in on a little secret, and listeners too. So I had not yet been to Europe when we were planning for our Disney Transatlantic cruise, which we went on a year ago. Several months before that trip, we were already exploring going to Europe a second time, and mind you, we hadn't experienced Disney yet via Europe. So we were exploring itineraries, as many of us often do, far in advance, and we stumbled upon this Royal Caribbean 12-night British Isles cruise. And Disney indeed offers usually 1 or 2 British Isles cruises a year. But for us, the timing and other factors weren't quite right. And we realized, okay, we want to make this work, and found Royal Caribbean's option, and it looked fantastic on a number of different fronts. And we're like, you know what? We're going to figuratively, if not literally, jump ship. And I've been holding on to that one for a while, Steve. And literally, we were like, this is a perfect opportunity to see a different part of Europe. On our transatlantic, we saw Portugal and Spain, and we knew if we wanted to go back to Europe, we wanted to explore a different region. So this served as a really good platform for that. So we hadn't even done the Disney Transatlantic, and we're like, okay, we're committing ourselves to another cruise line. And a year and a half later, almost, we finally took this trip.
Oh, that's great. So Disney does offer those British Isles cruises, but they're always in September. It's like right before the Magic comes back on the transatlantic, and we've looked at them as well. They're not as extensive as the one that you went on as far as the ports go. But it's also like the worst time for us because, and probably for you too, being, in grad school still, it's when school's back in session. So it's a really tough cruise to get on.
Yeah. So thankfully, and that's the beauty of Royal and Norwegian and other cruise lines having many more ships to play with, they can position them in other parts of the world for many cruises throughout the summer and into the fall too.
Okay. So, well, let's just jump into your cruise then, Brett. This is the first time, jumping ship and getting away from Disney and heading over to Royal Caribbean. How did you guys kind of prepare for it, to kind of learn about what Royal offered, some of the drink packages, dining packages, the staterooms that they had? How did you prepare for it?
Yeah, well, we definitely spent a lot of time exploring the Royal Caribbean website, which is not the most user-friendly. We ended up consulting RoyalCaribbeanBlog.com, and they have a great podcast as well, and a YouTube series, I should say, as well. Lots of good resources there. We, reviewed different travel guides to get a sense of what this particular region had to offer. I'm a big fan of Rick Steves, and I would very much recommend other listeners, if you're ever traveling to Europe, pick up his travel books, watch his TV show, provides a lot of insight. So we were trying to get as much info as possible about both the cruise line as well as the destinations we were visiting. And because we, had planned this quite a long time ago, we had the chance to really go in depth with that stuff.
So I know Rick Steves does cruise guide for the Baltic and the Mediterranean. Does it reach up into England, the Mediterranean one by any chance? Probably not the Mediterranean, but does he have anything?
Yeah, he has a Northern Europe cruise book, and my memory, I felt like it covered a lot more of Scandinavia, but I imagine there was some content for the UK, and certainly he has guides related to the UK as well.
Yeah, and we're huge Rick Steves fans too. We've used his guidebooks for years, and we just love kind of the advice he gives in them. And now that you say that, you're right, it's not the Baltic, it's Northern European, and we use that when we did our Baltic cruise. It doesn't always have all of the different ports in there, so if you do pick it up, it maybe have, like the Mediterranean one that we just did last summer, I think it had 4 of the 5 ports we stopped at. So, but I think it's a really good resource if it's going, the cruise ones at least are a really good resource if it's stopping at your ports. But beyond that, just in the different cities and regions, we love them.
Oh, absolutely.
So, well, good. Well, okay, so your cruise starts in Amsterdam. How did you guys get over to Amsterdam from the U.S.?
Yeah, so we took a couple of flights from the States, and it worked out well. We planned in advance that we would have a few days in Amsterdam, and we wanted to have that cushion to adjust to time zones, because essentially we crossed, I believe ended up being 9 time zones by the time we got to Amsterdam. And we did a straight shot. So we left Arizona, where my parents live, early in the morning on a Friday, and we got to Amsterdam mid-afternoon Saturday. So it was a 30-hour travel day.
Wow.
So, because we had a long layover, among other things. But yeah, once we got to Amsterdam, we spent about 3.5 days there, taking in the museums and parks and bicycling culture, which is fantastic, and dining and beautiful architecture and canals. It's really a first-class city.
Where'd you guys stay? Did you stay at a hotel? Did you use Rick Steves guides to find the hotel, or did you Airbnb it?
We did. We stayed at a little hotel, like a boutique hotel, but sure enough, and you would appreciate this too, Rick Steves offers guided tours, like they're like vacation packages, and the people who were on those tours were actually staying at our hotel.
Okay.
It was a 14-day Amsterdam to Rome tour, and there were a bunch of folks who were just beginning their 2-week experience there. So
that's amazing. So getting around Amsterdam, I know they've got that great bike culture and everything like that. Any other pointers for getting around and just exploring Amsterdam as far as getting around the city itself?
Sure. Yeah, we didn't use public transportation, but it is very accessible. There are tons of like trams and buses throughout the city that are really great from what I hear, and certainly from what we saw. The bicycling is huge. You have to be very cautious about not getting run over because there are more bicycles than actual cars. But it's also an extremely walkable city. The footprint of the main part of the city is very tight, so it doesn't take terribly long to get from one point to another, at least for a lot of the main attractions. So just absolutely gorgeous, and the people are very friendly too, even though it's a Dutch culture. That most people speak English, so even if some of the signs are not in English, rest assured, if you're not bilingual, you'll probably be okay.
Any major highlights stick out to you that you want to talk about quick before we move into the cruise itself in Amsterdam that you might kind of steer people towards seeing?
Well, the Anne Frank House is certainly one of the most popular attractions, and it requires booking several months in advance. When your window opens, about 2 months before, I believe, you have to book it right then and there. Otherwise, you miss your chance of being able to get a spot. Rijksmuseum, or the Rijksmuseum, depending on how you pronounce it, is the world-class art museum that has a massive collection. The Van Gogh Museum is also very popular, dealt with huge crowds in both, even though we had timed entries. And with a lot of these places, you just want to get there first thing in the morning, so you deal with less crowds. Amsterdam's having a major problem right now of just over tourism. There's just too many tourists than I think they can handle. But as long as you hit the places you want to see early in the day, you're generally good. We took a 3-hour bicycling tour throughout the city. That was fantastic as well. So you just want to kind of immerse yourself in the culture, take in the museums, the food, the public transportation. It's a great place to be.
It's a great starting off point. If you're looking for a city, I think if you've ever been to Europe before, I think it's a great city to start in to kind of get your feet wet before you move on to other ones, I think.
Totally agree.
Yeah, just because you get it's not quite like London where it's British, but it's still it doesn't feel like America. I don't mean to say it that way, but it's familiar because everybody's speaking English. But you can go to a city like Amsterdam and feel pretty comfortable being a little bit outside of your comfort zone if it's your first time, I guess.
And I'll add too, just as an addendum, I've traveled to a ton of major cities in the U.S. and I've never felt safer in a big city as I felt in Amsterdam. It's very comfortable to walk around. Pickpocketing apparently is a big deal, but at least all the people I had come across and talked with, and even on the cruise, had nothing but positive things to say about safety and just navigating the city as well.
Well, let's turn to your cruise then. You guys booked the 12-night British Isles cruise on the Brilliance of the Seas. Let's talk a little bit about getting on the ship and then your thoughts of the ship itself.
The process of just getting to the port and going through all those procedures of checking in was very seamless. You get on the ship. For listeners to appreciate, it's about the same size as a Disney Magic or Disney Wonder, just over 2,000 or so passengers, if I'm not mistaken. So the size felt very much akin to the smaller Disney ships, but I think it debuted in the early 2000s, so it's roughly the same age as those two vessels. But it's a beautiful ship, very much nautical inspired. A lot of the spaces really play off of being on a ship, and lots of wood trimming, and there were boat models in different places, and it had a very classy vibe. There wasn't as much character or personality to the ship as as Disney, I would say. You walk down hallways of different floors, and one thing that was cool is they had on each deck, I should say, was themed to a different destination around the world.
Oh, really?
So you walked on. Yeah, so for staterooms, for instance, one deck, it was all around London, another was around New York. We were on a deck and it was all focused on Florida. And sure enough, they actually had a poster that had Mickey and Minnie in front of the Grand Floridian Hotel Resort.
In your room?
No, on the floor,
on the
or
floor,
on the deck, in the hallway. In the hallway.
That's
it was the
cool.
strangest thing. It was very weird.
Well, they were welcoming you home.
I know. I felt so much more at ease once I saw that.
Take a deep breath, and it's like, okay, this is going to be good.
Yeah, exactly. There were little Disney touches sprinkled in unexpected ways. I saw a Dory from Finding Nemo, a Dory, like little stuffed animal in the shop.
Oh, man.
It was very weird. I think it was a mistake, but anyways.
Yeah, I guess that's kind of the way we felt on the two Norwegian cruises that we've been on, where, I mean, the ships have been immaculate, very nice, but it well themed, I guess, but somebody I just talked to recently said it just didn't have that homey kind of comfortable feel, I guess. Did it kind of feel that way to you? Does that make sense?
I think, yeah, that makes complete sense. I would say I had the same sentiment. So for instance, you walk onto the ship, and it's, for the brilliance of the seas at least, it's a relatively small lobby, if you want to call it, like main area in terms of footprint. However, whereas on the Magic and Wonder, is it like three decks?
Yes,
for the lobby.
Yeah.
So in comparison, this was like 8 or 9. So it was, you just look up and you just see the elevator ascend higher and higher up, and it's extremely open, which means that can get really noisy. It didn't have the same intimacy and, I want to say, class as Disney. It like right as you walk on board, there's like a bar area and a little dance floor and a lot of seating, and you have the typical shore excursion desk and guest services, but it didn't feel, I don't know, it was immaculate and quite ornate, but it didn't have the homey feeling that Disney affords, and perhaps that's where I'm biased, but and I wouldn't make that claim among Royal Caribbean more generally because I haven't been on the other ships, but it felt comfortable but not homey.
Yeah. It was just kind of an interesting way that he said it, and that kind of clicked with mine. And I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but it sounds like you kind of had that same feel as well. So, what type of cabin did you guys book this time? Yeah,
it was a balcony. The room was definitely smaller than Disney, and that's something for most people to know. Disney staterooms tend to be on the larger side, at least for comparable types of staterooms. For instance, there's no split bathroom, so that was definitely hard for us to adjust to, being 3 adults. But the room was nice. The bed, the main bed, I was on the pullout, but the main bed was not as high off of the ground as Disney, so it was difficult, if not impossible, to store luggage over there. So Disney's usually good in terms of that you can fit some things under the main bed. So it meant that the room felt a bit more congested with our luggage.
Okay, and how about like just the plugins and things like that? Was that sufficient for you guys being 3 adults, or how did that work?
Yeah. Very similar to Disney. There's a little desk area, and there were outlets that were reflective of both what folks here in the U.S. use as well as the European types of outlets. So that was, accommodating for sure. There was definitely good storage space. It felt overall very clean and nice, and I think it was definitely the right type of stateroom for us. I think certainly knowing that Royal, or at least these types of rooms, are a little bit on the smaller side compared to a Disney room, that's something just to take into consideration depending on what your travel party is like and number of people.
I guess one last question about the room. Having a balcony, do you think that was worthwhile, seeing as you were going to be going out of so many different ports, being able to be out on your balcony and kind of either watch the landscape go by or watch as you entered or exited the ports in the morning and evenings?
Yeah, absolutely. It was definitely a nice element to have. But by the same token, I think we would have had just enjoyable a cruise experience had we not had the balcony. I think for us that it was a clear yes because of having extra space and there wasn't really much of a price difference between that and an ocean view stateroom. But it was a nice touch, and there were many times where I was just sitting out there and as you know, and as I've shared, I'm a grad student. I still do a little bit of work on vacation. So there were a few moments where I was sitting out on the deck or on the balcony, as well as on the main sports deck area. And I was just sitting with my laptop, and I was coding interviews and doing my researchy things. And that was just pleasant, just looking out at the water. Or at times we were at port, and it was just nice just to sit out there and enjoy the view as I'm working for an hour. So
yeah, you can't beat that, being out on a balcony watching the ocean go by versus maybe being in Wisconsin in the middle of the winter and watching the snow pile up, huh?
Yeah. There's a clear distinction there.
Well, let's turn to the food then. I know that they have main dining rooms and then they have specialty dining, and I believe that it's kind of pay as you go with the specialty dining. What did you guys think of the food? Where did you eat, and what were your overall thoughts?
So I think it's worth noting too, with the way Royal Caribbean offers it, is you have a choice of 2 different seating periods, very much like Disney. But there's also I think it's called My Time dining, and it's where you have the flexibility in when you decide to sit down. We did not opt for that. We chose the main dining, and on this ship, being a smaller vessel, there is only one main dining room. So as opposed to Disney, where you change restaurants every night and your serving staff go with you, on this particular ship you stay in the same restaurant every night. And it was a regal atmosphere. There was a person playing the piano on many nights. It's a 2-story dining room, so it's very open. Noise levels weren't too bad. By the same token, it lacked the character and fun and enjoyment of a dinner experience that you would get on Disney. That said, again, there are differences across the different Royal Caribbean ships, so take it for what it is. As far as the food, and I think I may have shared this on a previous episode, I'm a vegetarian, and my parents are, my mom is, and my dad pretty much is too, so we opted for vegetarian options, and the wait staff, serving staff, they were extremely accommodating, even giving us some options off of the menu should we want to go with that. What I'll say, the food that we ate, complemented by some folks who we dined with and chatted with, the food was fairly unremarkable, at least in the main dining room. It was solid, but there were times where we had certain dishes and there wasn't a ton of flavor. We had a ton of desserts on board, and I think Steve, I'm a big dessert person.
Yes, I remember that.
On our last Disney cruise, we just there are times where we are ordering 2 or 3 desserts each. The way that it works on Royal Caribbean in the main dining room is, for desserts, there are usually 5 or 6 standard options that are on the menu every night. So if you want ice cream or apple pie or chocolate cake, you can go for it. And then every night they change, where they have 1 or 2 special options. Disney, on the other hand, it's kind of reversed, where there's usually 4 or 5 unique options each night, and then there's standard ice cream or whatever. So the lack of variety on the desserts front was disappointing, and similarly the quality wasn't quite as good. There wasn't as much flavor to a lot of the cakes or certain dishes. It just felt like it wasn't quite at the level of Disney. And it seems weird to say, because I know some people lament that, Disney food is not special compared to other premium cruise lines. But at least in this situation, it felt pretty just decent. Yeah. So, but, the experience was nice. We dined with a fantastic Australian individual who's she's like a grandma, and she's traveled all around the world, and she had amazing stories to share with us. So it made our dinner experiences quite nice. So, and yeah, we made a nice new friend there. So that dining with nice people and interesting people can sometimes make the food thing not as big a deal.
Definitely. So were you guys at the same table? Did they seat you at the same table, or are you guys just right next to each other?
Yeah, we were at the same table, okay. And that worked out wonderfully. And actually, a number of nights we chose to dine in the Disney Royal Caribbean's version of Cabanas. In this case, it's the Windjammer, and they had a buffet option every night at dinner, as they do for breakfast and lunch as well. And let me tell you, Windjammer is, and I don't know what it's like on other Royal ships, but the variety and just amount of interesting options was really, really strong. Flavor of certain things was kind of mediocre, but at least looking at it from the vegetarian standpoint, we were in pretty good shape. And even for folks who eat meat and fish and those types of dishes, they certainly had a wide variety of options too.
Did you guys go to any of the specialty dining restaurants then?
We did not. We weren't terribly compelled to. I think had the food been atrocious or had we not been happy with the Windjammer, we may have explored that option. But for us, it really didn't make sense. So
I know we'll touch on this in a little bit, but as far as like the excursion days, being in the port days, was that kind of did you find yourself kind of, being in the port so long so that by the time you got back in, you were missing your dinner time? Or does that make sense what I'm asking?
Yeah, absolutely.
Europe so busy. How did you guys do that or deal with that?
Most all aboard times were prior to dinner, so there was not a conflict on that front. We had an overnight in Dublin, so that night we stayed in the city, and that worked out just fine. So, and then even for folks who took like morning excursions that were over by 1 p.m., you have the Windjammer as the buffet option, that often being open till like 2:30, 3 o'clock. So accommodating folks who wanted to have a late lunch. Overall, it worked out pretty well. But I have to say, if I were to compare Disney and Royal, I think food quality wise, Disney is definitely a bit stronger.
Well, perfect. Well, let's turn to some of the activities that they had on board. What were some of the things that you guys did during we'll just start with the sea day before we talk about the actual shows. How did you guys kind of fill your time when you weren't off of the ship?
Well, much like sailing on Disney, there are a variety of activities, lots of different types of trivia. We competed in a number of them, and one of them I think we fared pretty well, but there were a lot of very competitive teams, a lot of teams that exceeded the maximum size, so they had a better shot at winning. But let me tell you, Royal Caribbean's prizes pale in comparison to Disney.
No winner medals?
There were winner medals for some of them, but often the best thing you could get was a pen or a highlighter. And I'm like, yes, those come in handy, but if you win one of these really difficult games, you kind of want something more special than that.
I think when we were on our Norwegian one, they were giving out frisbees. It seemed like every trivia we went to, they were handing out just a kind of a cheap plastic frisbee with NCL's logo on it. But well, there you go. So what kind of trivia did they have? Was it like music and different things like that?
Yeah, they definitely had a variety of music trivia. They had Name That Beatles Tune, Name That Michael Jackson Tune. There were a lot of just general knowledge trivias that were extremely difficult. I saw at one point they had a Harry Potter trivia. There was, I feel like, one movies related trivia, several that were visual based. So you were basically given a laminated sheet of paper that had pictures of different things, and you had to identify the celebrity or the thing. So there was definitely a nice assortment on that front. But in terms of the enjoyment of the trivia games, I felt like Disney was remains a bit stronger because of the cruise staff on board. There were, I'll say this, the cruise staff, the ones who are hosting the games and activities and some of the entertainment options, there were fewer on Royal Caribbean than Disney, which was interesting. But for the most part, they were pretty good. Some of them had more energy than others. There was one of those crew members, she did not want to be there. She was making offhanded remarks about some of the passengers, just a really bad egg. So that kind of made the mood a little bit less joyful.
Wow.
But not that I'm ranting, but
right.
it kind of, it's, you want to convey a good attitude, and some of them just weren't always happy to be there, but other ones were great. Going back to your question, Steve, about things on board on sea days, there were some really unique fun activities. There was a digital scavenger hunt where folks had to use their smartphones and basically scurry around the ship over the course of 20 minutes and find really interesting things. So take a picture of a crew member who has blonde hair, take a picture of something that starts with the letter Z, take a picture of a plant, like all these unique types of things. That was different. They had a couple of other scavengers hunts. On sea days, they also used those as opportunities to hold little lectures where they kind of previewed the different ports we would be visiting. So for folks who hadn't booked excursions or didn't know anything about the ports, that was actually kind of helpful to know where we were docking, what shopping and dining was nearby, some general facts about the places. That was cool. There were different games, Giant Jenga. What else? They had an art auction. They have a huge art gallery on board. So there were people, paying $5,000 for paintings on board and competing. So that was interesting. So the activities were overall solid, but because it was a British Isles cruise that was kind of catering to a more senior demographic, and certainly that was reflective of a lot of the cruisers. The average age on board was probably in the mid-60s. A lot of the activities were more geared toward that, so there wasn't as much in the way of activities that were active or, say, for like a scavenger hunt or things like that. A lot of things were much more laid back. There were, the typical like wine and beer tastings and things that were more geared toward a more adult audience. But in that sense, I was a little bit disappointed. And then during the evenings, whereas Disney usually has a ton of different options, what Royal Caribbean offers, or at least on this voyage, there was a huge emphasis on live music, which was absolutely fantastic. There were, at any given time, there could be six different groups all around the ship performing different types of tunes using various instruments, and that was a real blast. So I quite enjoyed that.
Well, let's turn to some of the shows then. Did you partake in any of the main shows, and what did they include?
Royal Caribbean relies a lot on the guest entertainers, much like Disney. The quality was a mixed bag. There was a very lousy magician. Then we had not like the wonderful gentleman you had on the podcast a few weeks ago. I remember I saw him on a voyage. He was much better than the one we saw. Thankfully, we were quite happy when later in the cruise there was a different magician who came on board who was much better. We also had 3. They call them Broadway style shows. I don't know what to call them. They were more like musical reviews, and they included the main performers on Royal Caribbean, and it was a real mixed bag in terms of the dancing and singing quality. There was one that was all about Broadway, and if for folks who haven't been to Broadway, they would be really, I think, just enchanted to see how awesome Broadway is in comparison to what the folks on board were illustrating. It just was, I don't know, it was just very inconsistent. There were singers on board. There were like 4 main singers. There were some nights where they were great and other nights where they were just lousy. So it was just inconsistent. But then they had some really great guest singers on board. They had a gentleman who was in the original cast of Jersey Boys on the West End. His name's Ryan Malloy. And he developed a group called Frankie and the Dreamers, so Frankie Valli, kind of like a tribute band. They were fantastic. There was actually a Disney connection. There was a gentleman, his name is Roger Wright, and he was the original Simba in The Lion King in the West End. So he gave a pretty solid concert. So the main shows on board, it's kind of like everything else. It's contingent on the quality of the performers, and sometimes you get some winners and other times you get more mediocre folks, and audience engagement plays a huge factor into it. The audience was not terribly responsive in terms of making a lot of noise or showing their enthusiasm. So when that did happen, you certainly appreciated the experience more.
Well, my kids have one question for you. I'm not sure if you made it up to the pool deck or spent very much time up there. I don't know what the weather was like, if it was cooler, being in England in the early part of the summer. But did you ride the Flow Rider by any chance? That's what they wanted to know.
That's a great question. What's unfortunate is Brilliance of the Seas, being an older and smaller ship, actually doesn't have the Flow Rider.
Oh, they don't. I'm like looking at it right now, and it shows like different activities. It shows Flow Rider, so maybe this is a generic.
Yeah.
Okay. So they don't have that.
This is marketing. This is marketing where they want you to think that all the cool stuff on the big ships are on the smaller.
Yeah.
No. But speaking to the pool deck, it was nice because kind of like Disney, they have a separate area. It's called the Solarium, and it's actually indoors, which is cool. So in case it's raining outside, you don't get completely drenched. So that's the adult area. And then they have the main pool deck area. They have a big screen TV, much like Disney. And that was a solid space. Spent a little bit of time out there. I was on the, as I said earlier, I was on the lounge chair studying, but I still enjoyed it nonetheless. It worked. There's a big rock climbing wall on the highest deck, and I participated in that several times, and that was fun, although it's contingent on not being too windy outside. So that limited my opportunities because it was a very windy cruise. It was also a very cold cruise. Not as many people wanted to sit outside because we had a lot of days in the 50s. So the outside experience, it was nice. The walking deck, unlike Disney, so Disney, your walking deck is around deck 4, and it's pretty much covered. This walking deck was completely exposed. You're walking on the top of the ship, and that was both awesome because you had a lot to look at, but it also meant you felt like you're like Mary Poppins and you're just going to fly away in the wind. I'll tell you, Steve, there were moments where like it was 35-mile-per-hour winds and I was in the front of the ship and I felt like the wind was pushing me. Like I'm like, I need to hold on to something.
You know, our last cruise when we were on the Fantasy was kind of like that. There two of the days and the sea days, it was just blowing like crazy. So if you went up in the front of the ship, it was I know they have some shields up there too, but it was pretty windy up there. So I kind of have an idea, except for it wasn't quite as cold as what you had over there.
Yeah. So no, it's always fun and enjoyable to walk on. I actually really love walking on the path up there. So that was actually an unexpected joy of the outdoor experience.
Perfect. Well, anything else about the ship, dining, entertainment before we turn into some of your ports of call that you guys got to experience?
Well, I think it's worth knowing just some distinctions from Disney that listeners might want to know about with Royal Caribbean. One is that you'll find a casino on board. And so if folks want to gamble, you have that option. There were more smoking areas on board too, and unfortunately, it really spread throughout different parts of the ship. So there were a lot of odorous, smelly situations on board. So I don't want to make that generalization to all of Royal Caribbean or even just this ship, but that was very prominent because, like I said, we've been on 7 Disney cruises, and occasionally something smells a little fishy, both figuratively and literally. But there were a lot of really bad odors at times.
No, that doesn't sound good.
But in terms of spaces on the ship, there was a nice, awesome little pub that was very much in the vein of O'Gill's. We spent some time there, and they had darts, so that was fun. There was a darting competition. There was another space that was like a bar lounge area, and they had pool tables, so we played pool. That was fun, and that's different because Disney doesn't offer that. Royal also has a live orchestra, and I've expressed on Disney how I've wished that they actually had live music for the stage productions as opposed to the pre-recorded audio. The live orchestra on there was amazing. There were nine members of the orchestra, and they were both performing sets on their own as well as during the main productions. That was such a standout, and I know that's across the fleet. So that's a nice thing about Royal. What's not nice about Royal is that they don't have hallway background music playing Disney tunes. So I know I missed that.
Do they have any music playing? I don't think they do they?
There was very little. There's also a cinema on board, and some of the older Royal Caribbean ships, and maybe some of the newer ones too, they have a little cinema, but it's extremely small. It's not like Disney where it's a 300 plus seat theater. It was like 35 to 40 seats. So if you wanted to see a movie, you either had to get there early or hope that they would be playing it again. So,
was there anything besides, I know the specialty restaurants and then the alcohol, obviously, or some of the specialty drinks cost. Was there anything else that you had to pay for, just out of curiosity, that kind of stuck in your mind?
That's a really good point. So I know for some of the Royal Caribbean experiences, you have to pay for soda. I don't think that was the case on here. At least that wasn't for us. We don't really drink soda, so that wasn't a factor for us. There were beverage packages, and I know we explored water packages. Usually with Disney, we get lots of bottled water. It was ridiculously expensive. On this, at least this Royal Caribbean cruise, so we had brought some water bottles, and we ended up just getting some water from the Windjammer area, and there were like just glasses, and we just ended up using those glasses to fill up our water bottles because of just being kind of pricey. As far as extra things that cost money, I know there were some tastings and seminars, like with trying different wines and beers, and kind of like wine and beer, and kind of like Disney, that does cost extra. I'm trying to think. There were some workshops where you could like engage in scrapbooking or creating cupcakes. Those were at an additional cost. So there were some hidden things, and those were signified by a little dollar icon on your daily cruise compass, which is like a personal navigator. So it was usually pretty straightforward if you'd have to pay for something. Do
they still have the paper navigator, or do they have a pretty good app like Disney has nowadays?
Yeah, actually both. They have both the paper version and the app. The problem is that sometimes there were inconsistencies across the two, and there were some cases actually where I ended up showing up to things that were canceled or relocated. So not always the best with making updates on those, but you do have those options.
Well, let's turn to the ports of call, and we'll kind of touch over each one of those. I know this is probably a big reason why you guys wanted to go on this cruise. I mean, some just amazing ports. You leave from Amsterdam, you have a day at sea, and your first port is Inverness and Loch Ness, Scotland. How was that? What did you guys have planned? Were you guys looking for the Loch Ness Monster?
We weren't, but mind you, there was a sign that said, Nessie is around here, maybe like something like, I'm sure you'll find him tomorrow. And mind you, you're at a cruise port and you're going to be leaving, so you wouldn't have the opportunity to. Now, we did not see Nessie. We took an excursion to Dunrobin Castle, where typical medieval castle. After a while, we got kind of sick of the castles, I should say. We went to three, if not four castles, and we had an excursion in Dover, England lined up, which was going to involve a castle. Mind you, it wasn't Dover Castle, it was a different one, and we ended up changing it out because we're castled out. Mm-hmm. But it's pretty awesome. We saw a flying demo with peregrine falcons, which are among the fastest animals on Earth.
Wow.
They apparently fly like 250 miles per hour, I want to say, when they're like diving from the sky. It was really cool. We saw lots of sheep on our travels, and Inverness was a really pretty city. I think it's Invergordon was where we docked, and then Inverness is the main city. Actually, that our cruise schedule was changed from the time when we initially booked it, so that ended up being our second port, and our first port wasn't part of the original plan, but we went to Lerwick in the Shetland Islands, which is part of Scotland, and that was we didn't really have much in the way of expectations. That was a beautiful little island, and we covered a lot of ground there, taking an excursion in the Shetland Islands.
So that was instead of Greenock, you said?
So that was instead of Glasgow.
Oh, instead of Glasgow. So, okay.
Yeah. So yeah, I know and it was frustrating because they didn't even inform the passengers that we're changing course. So we actually found out a few months before the cruise when we looked it up. Oh, they've changed it. But so just for reference, so folks have a sense of where we are. So the Shetland Islands is very, very far north. So it gets very cold there and extremely windy too. So we weren't thrilled by the idea of it, but we had a great excursion. We took a scenic drive. We actually saw and ended up petting Shetland ponies. So that wasn't part of the original itinerary, or excursion, I should say, that we had booked and changed. But we took a pleasant walk on to a secluded sandy beach. We saw some seals that were, I guess it was breeding season, so we saw some seals from afar, which was really cool. Both Lerwick and Inverness as our first two destinations were unexpected treats because they're not huge places, but they were just gorgeous in terms of the landscapes and getting a sense of these like little towns and villages.
Did you guys book most of your tours through Royal Caribbean, or did you go outside of them at all?
Yeah, we booked all of them. All of our excursions ashore were through Royal Caribbean. The sole exception was in Dublin, where we had an overnight.
Okay.
And that's when we decided to venture on our own.
I was in the Air Force Reserves for my last 5 years with the Air Force, and I worked with kids that wanted to go to the Air Force Academy. I didn't go, but we got to go up to the University of Washington when the Air Force Academy was in town playing them in football, and they brought one of those Peregrine Falcons there, and at halftime, that thing flew around the stadium. I've never seen, like you said, anything move so fast through the air. It was amazing.
They are incredible birds, and the trainer certainly had a lot of experience and interactions with them, and was able to give a lot of rich context about the birds.
Yeah.
But I have to throw in one quick thing about that experience because it was really funny. So I'm a fairly proud Badger as a Wisconsin person. So I wear a lot of Wisconsin stuff when I travel, and so does my dad. We met so many people who had Wisconsin connections at unexpected places, and sure enough, I was at Dunrobin Castle, and I see this gentleman with his family, and he had a little Wisconsin logo on his shirt, and I'm like, "Oh, are you Badger?" And he's like, "Yeah," and so we ended up taking pictures of him and his family and vice versa. And so I'm like, "Oh, how you're connected to the institution?" And he's like, "Oh, I'm a dean of one of the colleges there."
Wow.
And I ended up following up with him after the fact, and sure enough, he's our forthcoming provost, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. So it's like you never know the people you'll meet on the excursions or the places you visit around the world.
It is a small world sometimes, isn't it? Just amazing.
Yeah.
Well, from there, from Shetland, you're off to Greenock, Scotland? Or did you go to Greenock before you went to Shetland?
Actually, so Greenock, so that was going to be our port for Glasgow. So that was actually what ended up being canceled.
Okay.
So we ended up going to Lerwick in lieu of Greenock, Glasgow.
Okay. And what a neat thing to be able to see the Shetland ponies up there. They're just beautiful creatures, aren't they?
Yeah, and so friendly. We were able to feed them carrots.
Oh, nice.
so that was the highlight for me. Like you give me an animal who's in its natural habitat and enjoying itself, and I was very happy.
Well, from there you guys head on down to Northern Ireland. You spend the day in Belfast. Yes. How was that?
Belfast was solid. I can't say it was the most remarkable place we visited. It was certainly beautiful, and we went to some really nice vistas overlooking the city. We walked through the Queen's University of Belfast, which is a nice higher ed institution there. That was part of our excursion. So I'm like, great, I checked off an international university. We visited a castle there. That's the Belfast Castle, and that was majestic in its own right. But the highlight, and I'm going to be such a campaigner of this place, the Titanic Belfast Museum, which opened, I want to say, probably about 5 years ago, maybe. Mm-hmm. It is an amazing complex. It is such a beautiful, immersive, and interactive tribute to the construction of the Titanic and also the voyage. It is one of the best museums I've ever visited.
So I've heard they have kind of like a ride there, right? That you take as part of the museum?
There is, and it was surprising. It's, mind you, it's not a Disney attraction, so like people don't get your expectations too high. But you board these little vehicles that are like 6-person vehicles, and it's almost like Peter Pan's Flight, where so the track is above you, and you dangle over like a little kind of like a pit of sorts, and there's like little props illustrating the construction of the Titanic, and there's some voiceover and some nice lighting effects. It's literally a 5-minute ride, and there's not a whole lot to look at, but it was a nice touch. I got super excited. I'm I'm in a museum and I'm waiting in a queue for a ride. And it's like, I was not expecting that.
I've heard that museum is just amazing, and it's one of the places that we want to make it over to someday. So I'm glad that you had such a great time there too, and can kind of substantiate that that's a great place to visit.
And it's totally the way it works too, Steve. And it's worth mentioning that it's almost like a very linear experience in that you start in one spot and you're supposed to follow the whole timeline. You can go back and forth if you want, but the overall experience takes about at least an hour and a half. We spent closer to 2.5, and you definitely want to not rush through it because we could have spent a lot more time. There's so much to look through and explore, and lots of videos or audio recordings and things like that. So it's definitely a must-see if you're in Northern Ireland.
Well, so you guys go from the Titanic Museum and you get back on your ship. No worries whatsoever as far as sailing with Royal Caribbean. Did that make you nervous at all, I guess?
Yeah, it's definitely funny, not funny, but to think about the Titanic when you are experiencing a trip like that, and definitely a certain level of poignance to it too. We take it for granted how easy it is to cruise and to know how the conditions of different spaces have changed over time. So it was definitely humbling to go back onto a ship after that.
Yeah, and I shouldn't make light of that whatsoever. That was a terrible tragedy and whatnot. But it is a testament, like you said, just how amazing, how far we've come since that point to where we are today.
Yeah, and it's worth pointing out too that the museum doesn't sensationalize the museum. It's definitely honoring the people who are on board, but also just a massive engineering and architectural type feat of building a ship and sister ships as well, one of which had a kind of a similar bad fate. But yeah, I think it's really worth noting that it's not the type of place that's just exploiting the Titanic. It's really honoring it. Yes, you can get your merchandise, and I got a rubber ducky for a friend who loves rubber ducks, and it has has a little like captain's jacket that says the Titanic, so you can find some fun merchandise there too.
Okay, well, from there you guys are on to Dublin, Ireland. This is a place I've always wanted to go to, and it's kind of neat that you guys get to spend 2 days there. Talk a little bit about that, like what you guys planned, and it sounds like you stayed off the ship that night.
Yeah, there are opportunities for folks to book excursions through Royal Caribbean. Otherwise, you can get off the ship. The way Dublin Port operates is that it is relatively far from the city. You unless you want to take a 45-minute walk, you have to take a taxi or Uber. And there is so much to see in Dublin. It's definitely a major city with a lot of culture. We took in, I'm looking here, we went to 3 museums, a castle, Trinity College, a musical pub crawl, all in the course of a day and a half. So we did a lot.
With the pub crawl, did you see like people just singing music in the different pubs, or did you get to experience that at all by any chance? Because I know how much you like music.
I do, and it was also, folks who really enjoy the live music on board Royal Caribbean or any cruise line for that matter would get a kick out of it. It's worth knowing it's not a necessity to pay for one of these experiences, because you can go into any pub and listen to it for free, or just get a pint or whatever. But what was nice about this is we went to a couple of bars that were closed, or at least areas of the bar or pubs were closed just for our group. And we had 2 musicians who played a wide variety of instruments, including one which kind of was like a bagpipe of sorts. And it was nice. So we got a lot of context on how the instruments work and traditions, some folklore and common songs. It was a nice experience, but certainly folks can have that same sort of opportunity on their own as well.
I've heard that from a lot of people that have traveled over to Ireland, going into the pubs and how people will just get up on their own and sing, and people kind of stop and listen or join in. And I just think that would be kind of a magical experience, I guess.
Yeah, it's definitely nice. I'm glad we did it. I wouldn't, if I ever ventured back to Dublin, I don't think I would need to feel like I would need to go on a
crawl necessarily. Yeah.
Yeah, I could just experience it on my own.
Right. Gotcha. Anything else about Dublin before we turn our sights to Wales?
Not necessarily. I just think it's worth noting that Dublin has a lot to offer, and if you book a cruise and have the opportunity to do an overnight, that's definitely the approach to take. I think if you had one day there, it would feel very, very rushed. So try to maybe pick 2, maybe 3 things to see.
With the distance, like you said, too, from the port to the city, that kind of factors in, too. So it's nice to be able to spend the time there, get up the next morning, and then just go about your way seeing the things that you want to do.
Oh, absolutely.
Well, from there, you guys are off to, I've never even heard of Holyhead, Wales. What, where is that, I guess? Or not specifically, but what do you have planned there? And what was Holyhead, Wales all about?
Yeah, well, I can tell you where everything is because I felt like I was looking at maps constantly. I wasn't too familiar with Wales either, but it was just kind of a hop, skip, and jump over from Dublin. It was very close, so we were there the next day. And Holyhead, I'm trying to remember, Holyhead, I don't believe, had a whole lot to offer in just that little area, but we took an excursion where it was a bus tour through part of Wales, and it led to the Welsh, I want to say it's like the Welsh Railway, and we took a 1-hour train trip through kind of the countryside, and it was beautiful. There was some just absolutely breathtaking views around, I think it's called Snowdonia National Park, and a lot of it was in the mountains, and we went through a lot of winding one-way roads and like backups of cars. It almost felt like going through like a national park here in the States where you're waiting like 30 minutes to move a mile. But it was a really lovely experience getting to see such really, like, I want to say uncharted territory, but it's populated by tourists now, but it was just stunning, and we saw lots and lots of sheep. Apparently, not so much in Wales, but in, I want to say, Scotland in particular. I feel like they said, like, there's, for every one person, there's 5 sheep. So we got to see our sheep and our cows aplenty. It's really beautiful. You go to a place like that for appreciating the nature and just the natural world, as opposed to anything related to like museums, because they're simply not there.
I think the scenery along this whole cruise has got to have been pretty breathtaking at times. And I'm going to give you just a little tip. Don't book a cruise to New Zealand anytime soon, because you're going to see a lot of sheep down there too. So,
well, you know what? I would be happy with that, because I want to go there so badly.
New Zealand's beautiful. I'm not giving New Zealand a hard time, but there's a ton of sheep in New Zealand too. But well, cool. So from there, you guys pop back over to Ireland. You're off to Cork, County Cork. Yes. What do you guys have planned there?
Yeah, so I'm trying to think, and this is the type of thing where you go to so many excursions, or so many places, they all blend into one another. With Cork, we took an excursion called the Wild Atlantic Way, and this was a bus tour and included stops in a lot of small towns in the surrounding area. So we went to Kinsale, which is like a small medieval town, Timoleague Friary, I think that's what it's called, and Clonakilty, and that was a cute town, and we were able to have lunch in a hotel there as part of the excursion. We walked around it. A lot of these places, after a while, they felt very similar types of shops and dining, architecture, but we really liked, I'm trying to think, Kinsale in particular was extremely charming. It felt like it had been untouched over the course of centuries. Like yes, there were vehicles, but otherwise it felt like could have been from centuries ago. It was just such a pleasure to go through all these little places. Mind you, you go on a cruise often for like the big destinations, but these smaller spots, especially in this part of the world, were just utterly charming.
As you're talking there, I guess I have a question for you, because that's the way we felt when we went to Norway. I love Alaska. I think Alaska's got amazing scenery, but to be honest, I mean, most of the shops and the towns, it's kind of this similar type of touristy stuff. There's so many cruise ships that go through there now. Not that there's not, the cruise ships that go through Norway, but the thing that I really enjoyed about Norway is, like, we stopped at one town called Ålesund. And did you feel like, going to these different places, although there was a similarity because of just the region of the world you were in, was it more genuine and not the Diamonds International and the touristy shops for the most part, I guess is what I'm asking?
Yeah, no, that's a great point. There were some tourist traps and a lot of, cheap souvenir shops. You're going to find that in almost all places that draw a lot of tourists. But by the same token, there felt like a great level of authenticity because you have these like little mom and pop shops and little cafes and coffee shops. Amsterdam, on the other hand, if you're talking about coffee shops, they have a totally different definition based on the marijuana culture there. But yeah, in terms of these small towns, they felt like what you have envisioned in your mind, or if you've watched different videos online. It's very different than, for instance, if you're going to, I don't know, a port in the Caribbean where a lot of the shops or things feel very cheap, or just, you know, having like these little bargains and things. Like the vibe is very different, and I think part of that is just the rich history that goes back many centuries associated with these different places.
And I think that's what's special about cruises like this, that when you get off the beaten track a little bit, where you can, instead of some of these smaller towns, it just there's something special about that. So
yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there. That makes a huge difference, because it wouldn't be the first thing, you know, on your mind to go to a small little town that's an hour from the port. But if it's part of an excursion, or if you can do it on your own, it makes a heck of a lot of sense. Right?
So the next day you get another day at sea, and then you're off to Dover, England. This is a place that I had always wanted to go. Just there's something about the cliffs of Dover, and we actually lived in England for 3 years, and we never made it down there. And it wasn't until we went to Norway when the magic left out of Dover. It was a place that I'd always wanted to see, and I guess you guys skipped the castle there. But what did you guys have planned, and what did you think of Dover?
Yeah, Dover was, well, like I said, I didn't get a real sense of the port itself, but this excursion involved going to a few small towns, including Rye, that's spelled Rye, and Rye is a medieval town that dates back so many centuries, and it is so well preserved. We got to see a little museum that was kind of like a tourist trap, but it was like a visitor center. But they had a model light show of the town that could be really cheap and cheesy. It was really cool, and we walked around this wonderfully preserved little city, and there was like church services going on, and there was like some ruins. It was just absolutely just comforting and comfortable to walk around, even with the cobblestone streets and things that you might expect out of a really small town. So I don't unfortunately have much of a sense of Dover itself, except for seeing those magnificent white cliffs. But it was definitely a pretty place.
And I guess, yeah, Dover itself is pretty small, and maybe I kind of oversold. It wasn't necessarily Dover so much, but just seeing the white cliffs and just the massive and the sheerness of them. So that was, I know that was a highlight for us. And Rye sounds just like a quaint, great little town to be able to see what England used to be like, I think, in some ways, probably, and still is today in the smaller villages.
Oh, absolutely.
So from there, you guys finish the tour, or finish your cruise, and you're back to Amsterdam. How was getting off and then heading home from there? Did you spend some more time in Amsterdam, or did you guys go anyplace else in Europe before you headed back to Arizona?
Getting off the ship was very seamless. So part of it for us may have been, too, that we booked an excursion through Royal Caribbean, so we had a meeting place, and then we picked up our bags in the place where you could retrieve them, and we opted for it was a few hour excursion to outside Amsterdam, where they have an open air museum. So it was this really charming place where they had like windmills and these like little homes, and they had like little museums, and like you could taste different cheeses and chocolates and things. And there were more sheep. There were more sheep here too. But we got to get really close to the sheep, which was the ultimate difference. And there were these really cool little, very Holland-like homes that were on the property of this open-air museum. And people actually lived in these houses. So you're like walking through this open-air museum, and people are living there. So that was really cool. But from there, we headed to, I think it's pronounced Schiphol Airport, and headed back to the States from there. So the same day that we docked and ended our cruises, when we also ventured back to the United States.
Well, thinking back on this cruise, Brett, Is this something you would do again? Is Royal a cruise company that you would sail with again, or venture to find another cruise that would fit your guys' kind of plans?
So I'll reply with what the typical improv person might say, which is yes and instead of yes but. So yes, I would. I would definitely sail with Royal Caribbean again. It was a good experience in so many ways because the beauty, as I said, of Royal and so many of these other cruise lines is they have the ships, they have the opportunities to go to a lot of destinations that, at least at this point, Disney can't or doesn't, or at least not as frequently with only having 4 ships. But I overall really enjoyed the Royal Caribbean experience. There were moments when I was certainly frustrated with the lack of programming on board the ship, and that was certainly reflective of the type of itinerary as well as the audience. So I will not necessarily think that's the case with Royal Caribbean more generally. I know there were some different variables there. I certainly loved the places we visited, and I'm so glad that I had the opportunity to go on this cruise with my parents, and that we're able to have this new experience together, and we were constantly comparing different things to Disney, and I think other folks who are in the same boat will probably be engaging in the same practice, but it's definitely apples and oranges for in a lot of ways. I think the Royal Caribbean experience seems very much, at least on this ship, it seemed very much focused on food and music and dancing and gambling, and certain things resonated with me, other things did not. I definitely think the entertainment on board Disney, having been on 7 of them now, I can say is much stronger, but I also haven't been on the bigger Royal Caribbean ships, so I don't know if there are some variations in terms of the quality of the people they bring on board to perform, different sets or acts or things like that. So I would definitely sail with Royal Caribbean again. I felt very positively about a lot of the different factors. I think the destinations will ultimately dictate which cruise line I travel with, and I think to some extent I'll be even more mindful of the ship itself, because I certainly wanted to engage in more things on board, and at least for the things that I prefer, which is very much focused on activities and games and very active things. This ship didn't quite afford that for me, but I still love the rock climbing and things like that.
All good points. Any other last-minute tips for people that might be sailing with Royal Caribbean the first time?
Well, I think like anybody would plan a Disney cruise, it makes sense to definitely plan ahead, if at all possible, for getting better deals. We booked this very far in advance in order to get a good deal, and I know that's generally good practice. Sometimes there's some last-minute deals that come up, so you just want to be vigilant. I would say for anybody who's thinking about not going with Disney, definitely let the destination influence, or destinations, the places where the ship docks at, be a major factor, because you want to have a great experience on board, but you equally want to visit some amazing places. And we had 3 sea days. And for us, when there were times where there just wasn't as much happening on board, we were a little bit bummed. So you might also want to consider a ship that has a lot of activities or things that reflect your interests. What I prioritized may be different from others, or vice versa. But you just want to be thorough with your research and make sure that you're choosing a voyage and choosing a cruise line that best suits your needs and wants, and realize that there are going to be some distinct advantages from Disney. Like I said, I think the live music on board was overall far superior, but by the same token, the theatrical shows were nowhere as close as good as Disney's. So there are trade-offs, and that's like everything.
What's next on your guys' radar as far as cruising again?
Funny you should ask. Yeah, we're in the midst of trying to figure that out right now. We definitely want to get something on the docket. It'll definitely be next year. I'm not sure. I don't think it's going to be with Disney. I think it's certainly going to be with Royal Caribbean or Norwegian or a different cruise line. I think the destination will ultimately play a major factor. I love Disney, and I have all intentions of heading back to DCL. I think it's going to often be once the new Disney Cruise Line ships come on board, or if there's a special type of itinerary that Disney offers that aligns with my schedule. But I'll keep you posted. There will definitely be a cruise on the horizon. I have no doubt.
I have no doubt also that you guys will be sailing again soon. Well, as we finish up today, Brett, I know that some of our listeners have had an opportunity to go over to your podcast, which you recently started, Notably Disney. And why don't you talk a little bit about that before we close out the show today?
Yeah, thanks, Steve. Yeah, Notably Disney is your podcast if you love Disney music or books or things where people have written about Disney. You can find it all on the podcast. I released new episodes on the first and third Tuesdays of every month, so you get 2 episodes a month. Occasionally there's a special episode, but generally 2 a month. Then I bring on fellow podcasters and authors and musicians and just Disney fans who can speak to different aspects of music and literature, books about the company. So on recent episodes, we had a 2-part episode where we looked at the music of Michael Giacchino, who is the Oscar-winning composer of Up, also known for other Pixar films. And I had an author on recently who wrote a new book called Disney Connections and Collections, and it's all about all the different movies in the Disney library, and he kind of curated a lot of great information about that. So wide variety of guests where we talk about, like I said, different topics about music and books. So definitely encourage folks to check out Notably Disney. We're on iTunes and wherever you really can find podcasts. So I encourage you to subscribe and really help spread the love. There's other folks in the music book domain. Gradually, it's a small group. There's a lot of focus on the parks, and there's great podcasts, of course, like you're listening to now on DCL Podcast. But it's also great to cover other domains and two, to see that there's a lot of overlaps because we cover a bit of the theme parks and books and music as it pertains to the theme parks on the podcast too.
I can't strongly stress, if you're looking for something different besides what's going on at Walt Disney World, Disney Cruise Line, and you want to get a little bit deeper and maybe a little bit more cerebral, I should say, in some ways, because I think you do such a good job with that. And 2 of the shows that I've really enjoyed listening to, one was with Amy, I'm not sure if I can say her name, Ossentinsky.
Yeah. That's right.
Yeah, where she covered Disney theatrical productions, so kind of the history behind everything that's gone on with Broadway. I really found that to be kind of a fascinating history. She's got a book out that you can go and listen to Brett's podcast. It's episode number 5 on that. I really found that really enjoyable. And then also the one where you talked with the 2 authors are the 2 that run the book group, and I can't find it right now for some reason.
Book of the Mouse Club. They're a great podcast. Emily and Courtney over there, they were fantastic.
Yeah, so I can't highly recommend enough to go over and check out Brett's show if you're looking for something a little bit different in the music, the book, and then like you said, all that kind of comes together just as you're walking down on your next Disney cruise. You're listening to that music and you're kind of humming it to yourself as you're walking down the hallway there. It all kind of connects, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I should say too, what I really love about going on cruises too is just listening to podcasts. So I was listening to DCL Podcast and Book of the Mouse and all these others. So there's a lot of great, more niche specialty Disney podcasts emerging. So a lot to check out.
Definitely, a lot of interesting things. And I guess as we finish up, where can people find you on social media, Brett? Yeah,
so if you want to follow me on Twitter, I am B Nachman, Nachman, reports, reports. That's probably the best way of connecting with me on social media. You can also, if you're interested in, sending me an email, my email is bnachman, BNACHMAN, at wisc.edu. And if you follow me on Twitter, you'll get updates about new episodes of Notably Disney. So definitely check us out and spread the word, please.
Well, thanks again, Brett. I'll make sure I get that in the show notes, so you can always go to the show notes and find links to Brett's podcast and to his Twitter site. And I really want to thank you for coming on. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. You bring so much to our show with kind of your viewpoints of cruising and just traveling the world. And I really want to thank you once again for sharing it once again with your Royal Caribbean cruise over to the British Isles.
Well, thanks for the opportunity. It's always great to chat with you too, Steve. And I think if there's anything I got from this experience, Disney Cruise Line's awesome, and I think you appreciate Disney Cruise Line in different ways through checking out another cruise line as well.
Definitely. Well, thanks again, Brett. Best of luck this summer as you continue your studies, and we look forward to having you back on soon for that 5th episode and your special prize yet to be named.
Sounds good, Steve. Thanks so much.
All right. Have a great night. We'll talk to you soon, Brett. Well, that's going to wrap up our show today. Once again, I really want to thank Brett for coming on and sharing his experiences as they sailed for the first time on Royal Caribbean around the British Isles. And I really appreciate his takes and really loved hearing about the different ports that they stopped in, and just a cruise that I think our family would totally enjoy, and one that I know Disney runs, and you can do that in September, or if that doesn't work, you can always look into Royal and some of the other cruise lines cruising around there to get out there and see just some of the amazing sights that Brett saw, along with the sheep. Don't want to miss out on the sheep. Amazing amount of sheep out there around the British Isles. So, and do go over and check out his podcast. Just an amazing podcast, Notably Disney. You can find it on iTunes, and as Brett said, wherever you can find podcasts. His latest episode, we are wrapping this show up on September 19th, and his latest episode, which just came out, is Star Wars After Lucas, a book discussion with Dr. Dan Golding. Well, I hope you've been enjoying kind of our continued conversation as we compare Disney Cruise Line to some of the other options out there. We've got a couple more shows like that planned, and Christy and I look forward to bringing you our show next week. I think you're going to have a lot of fun with it. We've got some good laughs, and it's all about looking into all of you who may be traveling to New York City and sailing on the beautiful Disney Magic as she begins her sails out of New York City up to Canada, down to Bermuda, and one sailing down to Castaway Cay with a stop off at Port Canaveral for those of you who might want to pop into the theme parks on that sailing. Well, if you'd like to get a hold of Christy and I between now and our next show, you can always reach us over myself, Steve at dclpodcast.com. Of course, you can reach Christy at packyourpixiedust.com. You can find us both on Facebook at DCL Podcast, and I'm on Twitter at DCL Podcast, and Christy's on Twitter at PackYRPixieDust. So between now and our next show, if you are heading out on your next vacation, all of us here at the DCL Podcast would like to wish you fair winds and safe travels as you head out on your next adventure. Once again, thanks for coming back and taking a listen, and we'll see you next time on the DCL Podcast.